totally forgot about that. Well, alright. What can I tell you? Hey there, friends. What's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Aleph, Daf 91 of Masechta Yevamos. Friends, Daf 91 we sort of continue going weiter in the Mishnah that we started the other day about the fellow who we thought he was in Wellwood, but he really wasn't. In different nafkaminas over there. So, I guess so. Friends, let's get started over here. We're going to start in Daf Tzadi Amud Beis all the way at the bottom. Okay, so we said that in the event, right, so we thought that her husband was in Wellwood, really he wasn't, and he comes back and it's all like, this is awkward. We thought you were in Wellwood. So he's like, no, I'm not. And they're like, yeah, we know, we could see. And then they're like, okay, so now what do we do? So the Mishnah is like, well, you get divorced and stuff. So we say that she, in this case, right, she got remarried already in the meantime, and she has to get divorced from both men, and she'd be unable to marry a kohen. If she was a Bas Yisrael, she'd be unable to marry a kohen anymore. So it says the Gemara Pshita already on Daf Tzadi Aleph Mural. Pshita, obviously she'd be able to obviously she'd be unable to marry a kohen because she just had an extramarital relationship with this other fellow. So Bas Levi min haMaiser tzricha. So and for the Gemara, well, enochinami. Yeah, it's true. A Bas Yisrael marrying a kohen, yeah, that's true. It's pretty obvious that she'd be unable to marry a kohen. However, the chiddush really was for the next part of the Mishnah, which says that if she's a Bas Levi, then she's unable to eat Maiser. Bas Levi min haMaiser mimishla b'znus. But why? Why would a Bas Levi be unable to eat Maiser? Well, we're concerned that because of this extramarital relationship, it's znus. But znus is not going to make a Bas Levi unable to eat Maiser. But Tani would learn in a Brayso Leviish in Nishbeis. If you have a Bas Levi who was taken captive, and we don't know what happened when she was taken captive, it could be that she had a sexual encounter with one of the captors, which would be considered znus, or shenivala beila znus, or she just generally had a relationship of znus. Nonetheless, she's able to eat meiser. So I don't understand why would a Bas Levi be unable to eat meiser. Rav Sheshes says, well, it's a knas, it's a fine, right? Meaning because in this situation, she ended up getting married only based on one witness, and she thought that she looked well enough, but I guess she didn't. And anyways, as a sort of fine for this relationship that occurred, she's unable to, a Bas Levi would be unable to eat Meiser. Bas Kohen min ha-truma, and if she's a Bas Kohen, she's unable to eat Truma, afilu b'truma d'Rabbanan. This even includes Truma midrabanan. Excuse me, 1 second. The Mishnah had continued, that the inheritors of neither husband would be able to inherit the ksuba. Ksuba ma'avidta. What are we talking about ksuba? Didn't we already say that she doesn't get a ksuba? I'm papa ksubas benin dichrin. The ksubas benin dichrin. Who could tell me what a ksubas benin dichrin is? So interestingly, there was a concern that let's say you have a girl, and a girl gets married, and the father before the marriage is concerned. If he gives her a big dowry, what happens if she dies? So then her husband basically inherits the dowry. If the husband gets remarried, and then, they have kids, so what will happen is that if the husband dies, so let's start over for a second. One detail I want to add. So if this woman who's getting married gets married to this guy, and then they have children, right? The concern is that if this woman then dies, so her husband is going to inherit her ksuba. She's dead, he then marries another woman and has children with her. So now he's got a whole bunch of kids, some from his first wife, some from his second wife, and then he goes to Wellwood. So what happens? Basically, all the kids divide up his estate equally. Now the thing is, the original father-in-law is concerned, like, my dowry that I'm investing into that I'm sort of putting into this marriage is going to end up being inherited not by my grandchildren, but also by the children from the second wife, right? Because if his daughter dies before her husband does, so then her husband's going to inherit the ksuba. When he gets remarried, so then he kind of brings the dowry into his new marriage, and if he dies, then all the kids, including from the new marriage, are going to be inheriting his property, which includes the dowry from the original marriage. And the original father-in-law is going to say, wait, I don't want these other kids inheriting the dowry that I'm bringing into the marriage. I want that to be for my grandchildren. So they set up this thing called ksubas b'nin dichrin, which is basically a guarantee that only his grandchildren would be the ones to inherit the dowry that he is bringing into the marriage. So now what we're saying is that in this case, however, when we thought that her original husband went to Wellwood and then she married a different husband, so then we're saying that the ksubas b'nin dichrin doesn't apply anymore, that the children from, right, that meaning if this husband, the original husband, gets remarried and then they have kids, and so there's no protection to say that the dowry that was originally brought into the marriage from the original father-in-law would be protected only for his grandchildren. That becomes null and void oichid. So Amar Pav Ksubas b'nin dichrin pshita. That's obvious. I mean, right? So we're saying Ksube, any halachos of Ksube don't apply. Ma'adutem ledida da'avda yisura kansur rabon lazar the kansur rabon kamash malam. We may have thought to say, look, that these restrictions against collecting the Ksuba apply to her, because she's the one who, we're assuming should have maybe done a little bit better due diligence before getting remarried. But the children didn't do anything, so maybe they would be able to preserve this ksubas b'nin dichrin and therefore inherit the dowry fully. Kamash malon, that no, ksubas b'nin dichrin, even though the kids didn't do anything, is also going to be null and void. That the siblings of the first husband and the second husband, meaning if the respective husbands die and they don't have kids, so then the brothers would do chalitza. They do not do yibum. So the brothers of the first husband, cholitz mida oraisa, will do chalitza mida oraisa, v'lo miyab mida rabbanon, and they refrain from doing yibum only mida rabbanon. Mida oraisa they could do yibum because, right, she remained married to the first guy. But we say mida rabbanon don't do yibum, rather do chalitza. Achiv shel sheni. Now the brothers of the second husband, who she wasn't actually married to because she was still married to the first husband, choletz midirabanon v'lo miyab lo midaraisa v'lo midarabanon, so he does chalitza midirabanon. And when we say that they don't do yibum, that's midaraisa as well as midirabanon. They do not do yibum because they weren't actually really married. So there was really no chiyuv of yibum or chalitza. Rabbi Yossi Omer ksubasa al nichsei ba'ila v'chulei. So now, the Mishnah, at the end of the Mishnah, had a three-way machlokas: Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Shimon. That Rabbi Yossi says that Shitake gets the ksuba from the first husband. Rabbi Elazar says that the first husband merits to mitziyasu ma'asiyadeh and to be mafker or nidarim. So that's what Rabbi Elazar says, right? That the first husband can, chaperine things that she finds or that she does. He can nullify her vows. And Rabbi Shimon says that if one of the brothers of the original husband did chalitza or yibum, so then the tzara of, so then her tzara would be p'tura, i.e. yibum and chalitza are shaykh to the brothers of to this wife and the brothers of the first husband. Okay? So now, Omer Rav Huna says, Rav Huna, Basrai modu l'kamoy, kamoy l'modu l'vasrai. So it says Rav Huna that each later opinion agrees with the earlier opinions, but the earlier opinions do not agree with the later opinions. So for example, Reb Shimon, who says that she can even do yibum with the brothers of the first husband, would certainly also say that the first husband is zocheh to, mitziyasu ma'asiyadeh and afaris nitareh, like Rabbi Elazar, and also that she would get the ksuba from the first husband, right? So Reb Shimon would agree with everybody. Reb Yossi would agree with nobody, only his own opinion. So Rav Huna, I'm reading that again, Basroi modul l'kamoi, that the later opinions agree with the earlier ones, kamoi l'modul basroi, but the earlier opinions do not agree with the later opinions. Reb Shimon, modul Reb Elazar, so Reb Shimon, who says that if she does yibum with one of the brothers of the first husband, so then her tzara is ptura via that yibum, i.e. she can do yibum with him. So modul Reb Elazar, he would also agree with Reb Elazar that the first husband also merits to chaparain her what she finds and what she makes. Because if Reb Shimon, after all, is saying that bia, marital relationships or relations, or in this case yibum relations, are permitted, and that's like sort of the biggest thing that we're concerned about here is the whole adultery thing, is the whole extramarital relations thing, and we're saying that she's allowed to have intercourse with the brother. So and so Reb Shimon saying that okay, certainly, right? What's it called when things are like lighter kind of things? I don't know. I think my brain's not working so stark today. I'm getting enough sleep. I don't know what the word is. Things that are like, I don't know. So things like the things that she finds or that she makes, which is just mamona, so then it's just money. So then certainly Reb Shimon would say that he would agree with Reb Elazar regarding that the first husband is zeicha to mitzias u'ma'aseh yadeh. Reb Elazar l'modeh Reb Shimon. However, Reb Elazar would not agree with Reb Shimon because mitzias u'ma'aseh yadeh the mamona lo konis. Because after all, look, he's just saying that the husband is zoche to financial things that she finds, things that she makes. Of a bia, the surah who konis. But to say that she can have bia with one of the brothers if through yibum, no, Reb Elazar would not be willing to say that. But Tavai module le Reb Yossi. Now both Reb Elazar and Reb Shimon agree with Reb Yossi that she would be able to chaparan the ksuba from the first husband. Right, if after all Reb Elazar and Reb Shimon are talking about things that they're living together, right? Bia in Reb Shimon's case, Reb Elazar is talking about mitzias u'ma'aseh yadeh, things that arrangements that a husband and wife have, and Reb Elazar and Reb Shimon are saying that that's acceptable. So then certainly a ksuba, which is basically a document that she collects on the way out, either when they get divorced or if he dies or whatever it is, certainly then they would say that would be acceptable. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yossi does not admit to them because ksuba de mishkol meipaku de lo konis aval hani dias v'tusei konis, because he would say exactly the opposite, which is, look, I say that she's zocha to the ksuba from the first husband because that's something that you collect on your way out the door, and we want you to go out the door. But things like mitziaso, ma'aseh yadeh, bia, these are things that are related to living together, and Rabbi Yossi would say that would not be acceptable. Rabbi Yochanan Taka says the opposite. Kamoi modulu v'asroi, that it's the earlier rabbis who agree with the later ones. V'asroi modulu kamoi, but the later ones do not agree with the earlier ones. What does that mean? Rabbi Yossi module the Reb Elazar. Look, Rabbi Yossi would agree with Reb Elazar that mitzias and ma'aseh yadeh would be permitted. That the first husband is zocha to things that she finds and things that she makes. Ksuba de medida ledida lokanis, because after all, if the ksuba that he's giving her, he's like giving her something, right? On the one hand, we're saying that we want them to get divorced, yet we're saying that he's actually able to give her stuff, and we're saying that that's not a problem. Certainly, things that she finds, things that she makes, that are things that are more like punishing in a sense, like she has to give them away to her husband. Certainly that would be acceptable. We wouldn't be concerned. But Rabbi Elazar would not agree to Rabbi Yossi because mitziaso ma'aseh yadeh with the medida ledidei lo konis, right? Things that she finds, things that she makes, that she has to forfeit to her husband. So we didn't sort of restrict that. But ksuba, which is something that he gives her, so that is not something that we want. Rabbi Elazar would say that is not something that would be acceptable. And both Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Elazar agree with Rabbi Shimon. Right? If these things, right, mitziaso ma'aseh yadeh, ksuba, things that when he's alive he can give them. Bia de lachar misa lo kol shekain. Bia, right, yibum, which is after misa, certainly would be okay. Rabbi Shimon lamodi Lehu, but Reb Shimon would not admit to them because Bia would lachem bisa lo konis, havalani de mechayim konis, because Davka Bia, right, Yibum, which is after he's dead, okay, fine, so we don't make any kind of a fine or a kanas dartin. But things like Ksuba, Mitziyosa, Masiyadeh, things while he's alive, so then we don't want that to take place, but in the context of this relationship that we want to be dissolved because she thought he was in Wellwood and he wasn't, and it became a whole mess. Fine. Now, Niseis Shalom Birshus V'chule. So the Mishnah had said, and the assumption is that this is the opinion of Reb Shimon, right? Because after all, if we look at the flow of the Mishnah, so it says, where am I? Where am I? Wait, where the heck am I? Please, come on, I'm at the Reb Shimon Omer. Biaso chalitzasum ye'achav v'rishum poteres tzaraso ben aval imenu mams ve'im nisei shelo b'rishus muteres la'achzalo. And if she gets married to the second fellow because there were two witnesses, so then if he comes back from Wellwood, she'd be allowed to go back to him and get remarried and remain really married to him, and it's okay because it's not considered onus, right? Well, it is considered onus. It's not considered shogeg, right, or rotzon. Meaning, if a married woman volitionally has an extramarital relationship, then she's not allowed to go back to her husband. But if it was an ones, right, if it was against her will, so then she is allowed to go back to her husband, assuming that he's not a Kohen. So now, so Reb Shimon is saying that if two witnesses came to testify that her husband's in Wellwood, so then she got remarried and it turns out he's not in Wellwood, so she'd be allowed to go back to her original husband. So, Amr Rav Huna Amar Rav Achi Ilchsa. Says Rav Huna in the name of Rav that this is Take de Aloche. That if two witnesses came and said that her husband's in Wellwood and she gets married to somebody else and then it turns out he's not in Wellwood, so then she can go back to the original husband. Fine. Amr Rav Nachman. Says Rav Nachman to Rav Huna, Ganova Gnuve Lamalach, why do you have to be so shady? Why do you have to be so shady? Isvirlach Reb Shimon Emalach Reb Shimon. No, if you Rav holds, if you Rav Huna are saying that Rav holds that halacha is like Reb Shimon, so freaking say it, brother. Just say halacha Reb Shimon. The Shmaitach Reb Shimon calls it, because after all, what you're saying is that halacha is like Reb Shimon. So why don't you say, and if you're going to say, well, if I simply say that the halacha is like Reb Shimon, so then I might think that the halacha is also like Reb Shimon with regard to the fact that that you could do yibum with if the first guy dies, so she could do yibum with the brother. If I said that the halacha is like Reb Shimon, I might think that the halacha, it might sound like I'm saying that the halacha is like Reb Shimon even in that case. So Ema halacha Reb Shimon b'achronu. Okay, but still, just say that fine. So say that the halacha is only like Reb Shimon with regard to the fact that when two witnesses come to testify that the husband's in Wellwood, she can go, that the husband's in Wellwood and he's really not, so then she'd be allowed to go back to him. So just say that the halacha is like Reb Shimon in that specific case. Kasha, we say, it's taka aguta kasha. Yeah, it's taka, a good question. I guess Rav Hunas could have said the name of Rav, the halacha is like Reb Shimon with regard to the later clause, i.e., when two witnesses come to say that that he's in Wellwood, and it turns out that he's not, so she would be allowed to go back to the original husband. Oh, so now here comes Rav Sheshis. Friends, ready for Rav Sheshis? Rav Sheshis says Rav Sheshis, Amina kinayim b'shochivav omala shmaitza. Ooh, says Rav Sheshis that I think that Rav was half asleep when he said this. When Rav said that the halacha is like Reb Shimon essentially, that when two witnesses came and say that the husband was in Wellwood and it turns out that he wasn't, and in the meantime she got married to somebody else, she'd be allowed to go back to the original husband. Rav says the halacha is like Reb Shimon. Or as we just said, really, he says that this is the halacha, i.e. like Reb Shimon. So halacha mechad pligi. Says of Sheshes, by stating that the halacha is like Reb Shimon implies that there's a differing opinion. That there's an opinion that would argue, that would say that she's not allowed to go back to her original husband. Obviously she can go back to the original husband. How could she have played this any differently? Two witnesses showed up, said her husband was in Wellwood. She says, okay, he's in Wellwood. So she then goes and marries somebody else. which was totally allowed. Turns out he's not in Wellwood. She didn't do anything wrong. What was she meant to do? Obviously she can go back to her husband. Would anybody disagree with that? And more so. Tanya, we learn in a brisa, Kol harayos shebeteira ein tzrichis heimenu get. Any of the harayos in the Torah, you don't need a get, right? A fellow marries his sister, so when they break that up, you don't need a get, obviously. Chutz me'eshes ish shenises hapi bezdin. The only exception being that when you have essentially a case like ours, right? You have a married couple, one witness comes and says, your husband unfortunately is in Wellwood, so then she goes and gets married to somebody else, and then it turns out that he's not in Wellwood. So shenises hapi bezdin. So we're saying that in that case, when it turns out he's not in Wellwood, she has to get a divorce, a bill of divorce, a get from her second husband. Alpi bezdin u'deba yagita, alpi edim lo ba yagita. And Davka, in that case, she would require a bill of divorce, but if there were two witnesses, she would not require a bill of divorce. If it was two witnesses who came and said, we're sorry to tell you, but your husband's in Wellwood, so then she would not need to get a bill of divorce. She would not need to get a get. Okay? Money. Now, who's the author of this brisa? Who's the author of this brisa, friends? Who's the author of this brisa? By the way, friends, I told you about the chasana, right? And how I was in a groove for the first hour of the chasana, preparing the daf hayomi. Well, by this part that we're getting up to now, it was after my groove already. The whole night at the chasana, I was trying to chap people around to learn with me. I would try to. This was it's not that difficult now, but it was very hard to get through this. I kept on trying to do it myself. Whatever. Once things got moving at the chasana, it was a little hard to really learn a sugya properly. But I tried. I kept on chapping people around. Like, hey, you, why don't you come learn with me a little bit? Yeah. Whatever. Let's go weiter. So, Ilema Rib Shimon, if we say that the author of this brisa is Rib Shimon, the author of this brisa that says that when there was one witness and Bezdin approved this getting married to the other fellow, so she needs a get from the second fellow. And but if it was based on two witnesses, then she would not need a get. So if we're going to say that that's Reb Shimon, Hapi Bezdin mi ba get, would Reb Shimon really say that in the case where Bezdin approved the second marriage based on one witness, would Reb Shimon say that the second husband would require a get? That she would require a get from the second husband? V'atani, we're learning the brayso Reb Shimon. Says Reb Shimon also Bezdin bo raiton, that when Bezdin enables the testimony of this one witness to enable, approves the testimony of this one witness to enable this woman to get remarried. Kizadon ish be'isha. So it's treated like a consensual extramarital relationship, and which would mean that she'd be unable to go back to her original husband. Al pi edim, but if it was based on two witnesses, kishigas ish bisha, so it would be like a non-consensual extramarital relationship, in which case she would be permitted to go back to her husband, unless of course he's a kohen. Individual baya get, but in neither case would a get be required. So therefore, we see that Reb Shimon's opinion is that even when Bezdin approves the testimony of the single witness, so even in that case, she would not require a get. And yet, this brisa is saying that by the single witness, you need a get. So elalav rabbanani. So it must be that brisa that says that by a single witness you need a get, but by two witnesses you don't need a get, must be the rabbis. So we see that when it comes to two witnesses, even the rabbis would say that the second marriage is irrelevant, you don't even need a get. So therefore, going back to our original question of, Rav said that the halacha is like Reb Shimon, that when there are two witnesses, she can go back to her original husband. Everybody would agree with that. As we just saw, that there's a brisa in which even the rabbis say that when there are two witnesses, she doesn't need a get from the second husband. i.e., Memela should be allowed to go back to the first one. So we say, no, really, that first brisa is actually Reb Shimon. B'trei Tzachin answer the second brisa in the following way. The brisa which we said that, Bezdin is like a consensual extramarital relationship, and when there were two witnesses, it's like a non-consensual relationship, but we said that in both cases, no get would be required. Answer like this. Reb Shimon Omer also Bezdin ba'oraiton, that when Bezdin approves the testimony of a single witness in order to allow her to get remarried, it's kichavonos ish be'isha. It's like when a man sleeps with a woman with the intention of kiddushin, uvaya get, and in that case she would require a get. Alpi edim, but if it's based on testimony shelo b'chavonos ish be'isha v'lo ba'ya get, then right. So if it's based on witnesses, then it's as though a man is sleeping with a woman without the intention of kiddushin, in which case she does not require a get. I.e., Reb Shimon is saying that when the Bezdin approves this one witness and then she gets remarried based on Bezdin, she would require a get. But if it was two witnesses, so then she would not require a get, which means that also that brisa, which says exactly that with one witness requires a get, but two witnesses do not require a get, that is Reb Shimon. It's all Reb Shimon. However, the rabbis would say that even when there are two witnesses, she'd be unable to go back to her original husband. Rav Ashi Amar Le'inin Isura Katoni. Rav Ashi says, look, this second brisa is really not talking about getting at all. It's just talking about Isurin. This is what it means. Also, Bezdin Ba'oraiton Kizadon Ish Be'isha, that when Bezdin permits the testimony of one witness, and then it turns out that the original husband was really not in Wellwood, so then it's Kizadon Ish Be'isha Umitzra Abayla. She's not allowed to go back to her original husband. Nothing to do with getting, but she's not allowed to go back to her original husband. Alpi Eidim Kshigas Ish Be'isha Velo Mitzra Abayla. But if it was based on two witnesses, then it is as though it was a non-consensual extramarital relationship, in which case she would be allowed to go back to her original husband. But it has nothing to do with get, and therefore there's no implication for the first brisa. The first brisa could be Reb Shimon still. Ravina Amar says, Ravina Le'inin Korban Katani. Ravina says, look, this brisa is specifically talking about korbanos, that when it says also Bezdin Ba'oraiton Kizadon Ish Be'isha, that when Bezdin permitted her to get remarried based on the single testimony, so it's like Kizadon Ish Be'isha, it's like an intentional extramarital relationship, in which case there's no need to bring a korban chatas. You got bigger fish to fry. V'lo masi korban, she doesn't bring korban. Al pi edim, but if it was based on witnesses, kishigas ish be'isha masi korban, it's as if it was a mistake, and therefore you would have to bring a korban. Right, by shogeg you bring a korban. Vi by sema hakamaiser abonani v'trei tzachi chutz meishes ish v'shenishes al pi Bezdin. Or you could actually say that no, that initial brisa is the rabbis. However, they are saying, right, however, understand the brisa in the following way, which is that by arayos in general, you would not need a get. So if a fellow marries a sister, you would not need a get from her. The only exceptions being when Bezdin permits one witness, but also even if there are two witnesses, in both of those cases, you would need a get. So we see that is the opinion of the rabbis, but so the rabbis would say that you would need a get and that she would be unable to go back to her original husband, but Reb Shimon would say that you don't need a get and that she would be able to go back to her original husband. Alright. Masav Ula asked the kasha. Mi amrinan mai havala lemebud. Says Ula, do we really say this concept of, well, what should she have done? Two witnesses came, said that her husband's in Wellwood, she got remarried. What could we have expected her to do? That's not something that we usually say. We learn in the Mishnah. If a fellow is writing a bill of divorce, right, he hires a scribe to write a bill of divorce, and the scribe was meant to write the place where the bill of divorce is being written, but he writes some other place, right? He writes Rome, L'Shem Malchus Madai, or the kingdom of Madai, L'Shem Malchus Yavon, or Greece. Levini not bias, or he counts the date not from the date of the king, but from the date of the building of the temple, the destruction of the temple. If he was in the east, but he said he's in the west, he wrote in the document in the west, or if he's in the west, he wrote in the document that he's in the east. So then, if she got remarried based on that bill of divorce, that's a big problem, because she's not actually divorced, it's a pasul get. And anything that we had said in our Mishnah in terms of like not collecting the ksuba and all those things, so then all of those things apply. Why should all these things apply? Why don't you say, well, what's not her fault? She didn't write the bill of divorce. Yeah, but she should have read it over to somebody who's an expert, somebody who knows the halachis, that they could have pointed out that it was a pasul get, and she didn't do that. Therefore, there are consequences. So it's not a situation of like, well, what could she have done? There is something that she could have done. So if you have a situation where Reuven is married to Sarah and Rivka, Reuven goes to Wellwood, and then Sarah does Yibum with Shimon. So then Rivka goes and gets married, but it turns out that Sarah is an Ilonis. When it says Ilonis, it turns out that she's an Ilonis, in which case it doesn't really count for Yibum, because Yibum, the whole point is to have children. She can't have children. So now Rivka is in trouble, because she already got remarried based on the fact that that she's potter from Yibum because Sarah handled it, but Sarah turned out to be an Ilonis. Now she cannot be married to either the Yavam or to her new husband. What's the problem? Why don't you say, well, what was she supposed to do? She didn't know that Sarah was an Ilonis. Well, if she was careful, she should have waited to determine whether or not Sarah was in fact an Ilonis, whether based on if she can have children or not, or based on if she sort of is getting older and older but not displaying any forms of having matured. So there were ways that she could have been more patient and prevented this situation. So it's not exactly a case of, well, what could she have done? Amar Bai says, Abai Toshmak, Omenir Kol Arash, Potus Sarusayid, that in all these cases is basically very similar to the previous case, but in any situation where we say, well, there's erva, and because there is erva, so Yibum is irrelevant, as we've learned about in depth earlier in Masechta Yevamos, about different ways that arayos are potter from Yibum. So the tsaras went and married other people. So if the tsaras went and got married to other people, and then it turned out that the arayos are actually Ilonises, in which case Yibum isn't actually relevant to them, in which case the tsaras have to do Yibum. Well, then they can't be married to either their new husbands or to the Yevamos, and all of the sort of restrictions apply to them in terms of like suba and things like that. Why don't we say, well, what could they have done? Here as well, we say, well, they should have waited. Interesting. So basically the way that the get would work is that you would write the get and give it to the man. And then you would write the receipt and give it to the woman. And then the way it would work is that the man would now take the get and he would give it to the woman. Now the woman, upon having received her ksuba payments, would take the receipt and give it to the man. And now the woman has her get, the man has her receipt, the man has the receipt to prove that the get was paid, and that's that. But the scribe made a mistake, v'nosan get le'isha v'shover le'ish, and he flipped it around. He gave the bill of divorce to the woman and the receipt to the man, v'nosnu zelaza v'zelaza, and then they swapped documents, right? He gave her what he thought was the bill of divorce. She gave him what she thought was the receipt. And then they realized over time that they actually didn't do the right thing. She never received the get. And she had gotten remarried in the meantime. So basically, it's a mess. Why is it such a mess? Why don't we say, what was she supposed to do? Well, she should have read her document that she received to get a second opinion and make sure that it was kosher. She never did that, because if she did, clearly it would have been revealed to have been a receipt and not a get, or the opposite. She would have gotten the bill of receipt, the receipt, and not. She's meant to get the receipt, right, so that she can give it to the husband. But that didn't happen, and either way, she never really confirmed that she received a get. So she should have done that and avoided that situation. Amar Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi Tashma Kamanir, Shina Shma V'Shma, Shemiru V'Shem Ira, right? If on the bill of divorce they use the wrong name or the wrong city, and if she got remarried based on this bill of divorce, which is invalid, so then it's a mess. Why is it such a mess? Why don't we say, well, what should she have done? Here also she should have read over the bill of divorce to somebody else to get a second opinion and confirm that it's kosher. Ravina Tashma says, Ravina Kamanir, Konsa beget kereach, tetzemize umize bechule. If there was a bald get, so this is talking about basically they would, it was to prevent situations where like a kohen would get upset with his wife and divorce her and then be unable to remarry her because he can't marry a divorcee. So they had this special kind of get that they would have to fold it up into lots of folds, and then on each fold there would be a different witness that would sign it, and it was basically a whole drawn out process to write this get, and hopefully if over time he had second thoughts about divorcing her, he would have enough time to rescind his desire to divorce her and remain married to her. So if she got divorced with a get that wasn't of this folded type, so then we say, I guess that it is not a good get. So when we say it creates a whole mess, but why? What should she have done? She should have read it over to somebody and confirmed that it was actually a kosher get, and it would have been revealed that it wasn't, so it was avoidable. So we had asked a whole bunch of questions about do we really say the situation of, well, what could she have done? We brought all these examples of situations where we would have thought to apply this idea of, well, what should she have done? But in all those cases, there was things that she could have done. So in a place where truthfully we could say what was there really to do, such as two witnesses come and testify. That's the whole point of two witnesses, is that we believe them. And then they came and said that her husband's in Wellwood, and it turns out that he isn't. Well, that's really a case of, well, what should she have done? I mean, two witnesses are basically what's considered trustable. So she did everything based on what was meant to be trusted. So in that case, we can apply what could she have done. Rav Papa saw the mebod uvda, but my havla the mebod. So Rav Papa, there was a situation of this sort where two witnesses said that to a woman that her husband was in Wellwood, and it turned out that he wasn't. So Rav Papa thought to say, well, what should she have done? It's okay, she can go back to her original husband. So Rav Huna bar Yeshua says to Rav Papa, but what about all these questions that we just asked on this Amud? Rav Papa says, yeah, but we answered how really all of these cases are not actually a situation of what could she have done. And Rav Huna bar Yeshua says to Rav Papa, and what? Meaning we had a whole bunch of close calls. We had a whole bunch of cases where we thought to say, this really sounds like it's a situation of, well, what should she have done? And yet we're not, applying that clause. And sure, we had ways to answer them. But in such, a context in which there are so many questions, so many red flags, you're willing to just rely upon sort of the way that we sort of avoided them, and to say that she can now get remarried, can now go back to her husband, Ufasak. So Rav Papa said, you know what, you're probably right. We shouldn't so simply rely upon this concept of, well, what should she have done? Interesting. Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi l'kala lo chashin, right? That Davka, when the husband comes back and we see that he's really not in Wellwood, that's when there's a mess. But if we just start hearing rumors that, actually, right, the Yentas start talking, they say, by the way, I heard that maybe her husband really isn't in Wellwood, that's irrelevant. So, fine. Hey, Kala, what voice are we, what rumors are we talking about? Ilema Kala de Boston If we're talking about rumors that are emerging after she already got married to the second fellow, Ha'omer Rav Ashi chadazimna. Rav Ashi already said, the Omer Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi Kala de Boston lo chashinon. That any rumors that emerge after the wedding already happens, we ignore them. We need hard factual evidence. So certainly we wouldn't listen to that. Well, actually, it is talking about the rumors after the wedding. But I may have thought, well, I may have thought that since this is kind of already a skeptical situation to begin with, right? I mean, it's a situation where we only have one witness, and we have to go to Bezdin to get it permitted, and then she gets married, like it's already kind of starting out on shaky grounds. So I might think that in this case, even if it's after the wedding, and then we start hearing rumors that her husband really is not in Wellwood, so then he's well, not Wellwood. So I may have thought that in this case we might actually believe these rumors. So therefore we're saying no, we do not believe these rumors. We need him to mamash show up in the flesh. Friends, that was Daf Tzadi Aleph, Masechta Yevamos. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.